Let's create a new virtual machine for our clone master. So we're going to custom, install the operating system later, selecting Windows Server 2016. Next, giving our new VM clone name. So we're going to call this clone master. And then we want to point it to our external SSD drive. In that case, that's Speedy. And then you want to give it a folder name. And so I'm calling this one Clone Master. This just makes it easier if you ever want to move your VMs around that you know exactly what's in what folder. So there's our path that we're going to put it. We're going to use UEFI. And we'll just select the default of 2 processors. We're going to give it a little more memory. So we're going to say 8 gigs. Next, we'll use NAT. Default for controller, default for disk type. And we're going to create a new virtual disk. We're going to make it a little smaller at 40 gigs. And we're going to store the file the virtual disk as a single file. Next. And that looks good, so select next. Now we're going to customize. We're going to get rid of our printer, get rid of our sound card because we don't need those. Then we're going to point to our ISO file that we need to do our install from. And I have that on my other drive. So that's the Windows 2016 updated February 2016 that you got from Blackstar. And we want to make sure that that's connected at power on. And everything is looking good there, so we can select close and finish. Now we're going to power on our virtual machine. Since we're using UEFI, we will need to click into the screen and hit enter in order to actually start from the DVD. Select next, install now. Windows will start installing. Takes a little bit. We're going to say I don't have a product key, so it gives us a 30-day demo period to play with this. And we're going to select Windows 2016 Data Center with Desktop Experience. Next. And accept the license terms. Next. Custom. Next. And I'll start the install process. Okay, once that finishes, we need to give it a password. For our labs, capital PASSWORD01 will work. And that way you can remember it and just use the same one throughout, but never use that in production. So we enter our password. Make sure caps lock is not turned on, as mine was accidentally. And once it logs in, first thing we're going to want to do is say yes. We're going to allow it to see other networks. And then we want to install VMware Tools once it comes fully all the way up. What VMware Tools does is it adds additional features to your system relating to drivers for video, drivers for your networking, drivers for your disk that are specific to VMware. So VMware Tools is really important. We'll click the setup to install it. And for our case, we're going to go through and we want to do the complete install. And hit install. I'll start dropping files in, hit finish. It's going to require a reboot. And then you notice the screen now went full screen rather than before it was a smaller screen, and that's because we have the new VMware Tools video driver installed. Now we're going to just do a little bit of configuration here before we run sysprep. So we're going to go through and turn off the default firewalls. Again, something in production you aren't going to do, but for the sake of our lab, we are doing and turning off our firewalls. And we're turning off IE Enhanced Security so that when we open a browser, it's not going to nag us every time that do we really want to go here and actually say that every single page that we want to go there. We're going to turn off IPv6 because we won't be using that. And then we're going to select our proper time zone. Since we're in the central time zone, we'll select that. And then now that we have our time zone selected, we're going to go back into time, go to internet time, change settings. Update now. It'll talk to an internet time server and make sure our time is synced with that so that we have accurate time. Select OK. Now that everything is set up in a happy environment, we're going to click on the little eyeglass and we're going to do search for CMD. We're going to right click, run as administrator, similar to what we did in Linux, to run as root. And then we're going to navigate down to the root of our C drive, and then we're going to navigate back up to Windows and then System32, and then we're going to put our whole sysprep command in from the lab, drop that in. As long as it's put in properly, you'll get the sysprep is working, and what that's doing is that's stripping out any of the unique identifiers associated with Windows to make it so that it has a out-of-box state, which is what that OOB is all about, out-of-box. Now that that has set up, what we're going to do is we're going to go into snapshots and we're going to take a VMware snapshot of that virtual machine in its off state, and we're going to call that base. And that's what we're going to then be able to clone off of to build future Windows 2016 servers with GUIs. And so now we're going to do that. So we'll go back to okay, we're going to Clone Master, go to Settings, Options, Advanced, and then we're going to turn on Enable Template Template Mode, which allows this based server to be used as a template for creating future virtual machines. Select OK. Now we're able to build a virtual machine based off of that. So we can go to Manage, Clone. And welcome to the clone virtual machine, and we're going to clone it from base. Next, create a linked clone, which means if something's changed on the original, it'll follow to the link. We're going to call this one DC1. And then where we want to put it, we're going to map it to our external SSD. Which on mine is Speedy. Go into VMware Images, make a new folder, and we're going to call this one DC1. Select it, select OK, and then finish and close. And that will clone off a copy of the clone master to a DC1 virtual machine. So we don't have to go through the whole step of rebuilding it. We're just able to clone it, power it on, and then it's going to ask us some questions with a slightly different screen that we had before than what we set up. So select Next, and we're going to say product key later, accept the EULA, give it a password. Because as part of this sysprep process, it did strip out the password from the previous version we had. Click Finish, and it's going to present us with a login prompt. The first time you log it into a sysprep machine, it may hang for 3 to 5 minutes on a black screen. Let it run. If it takes more than 5 minutes, just do a power off, power on, and then do the login, and you should be able to log right in. So now what we have is we have a cloned server. It has everything that we had sort of set up before. So central time, i.e. enhanced security is already off, firewall is already off, Ethernet 0 is assigned by DHCP. So now what we want to do is find out what IP address range we're currently using it for our VMs. So if we go to details, we can see that 192.168.182.133 is the IP that DHCP assigned for my VMware machine. And what we really want to note is that 182 is the third octet, because we're going to need that in order to be able to set up, this is a domain controller. The other thing to take a note is the gateway and the DNS server. They're currently at 182.2 for both of those. Normally your gateway and your DNS server are going to have different IPs. For this particular instance, we're dealing with the same one. And that's just something that how VMware works for VMware Workstation. So now that we have all that information, we're going to go through and start making this into a domain controller. Okay, so we're going to give it a specific IP that we want so that we can actually find it from other servers. So we're going to give it the IP of 192.168.182.100. We're going to switch that to in just a second because I put it in there by accident because that's supposed to be the gateway. There we go. Now we're fixing that, so it should be a .100 for our particular situation. And our preferred DNS server will also be the 192.168.182.2. On your networks, this is going to be different, so that's why we looked at it initially to see what range is currently assigned on our virtual machine. VMware does randomly pick what the third octet is going to be, so you do need to go through that step. Now that we know what our machine is assigned to, we can go to our next step. And we're going to name our machine. We're going to call it DC1. Select OK. And then that's going to force us to reboot our machine. We have the right name and we have the right IP, which you can now see is shown for Ethernet 0. We just need to do one little thing. We're going to add roles. Next, it's a role-based feature. We're going to assign it to DC1. So it's Active Directory Domain Services. We're going to add the features. Next, 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 and install. Okay, now that the install is finished, we can select close. And then we'll see a little yellow triangle with an exclamation point. And we're going to select promote this server to a domain controller. And what we're going to want to do is add a new forest, which is the third option. And we're going to call our forest delta.local. Select next. And there's two different functional levels. We're going to keep those set at 2016. But you will see if you select them that you can select previous versions. So for compatibility with other networks, you may select a prior version than what you're actually running. But the domain functional level will determine what your forest functional level is. And then we're going to be installing the DNS server and the global catalog with this server. Assign a restore password. So if ever you're needing to repair your Active Directory, that's the password that you'll use to get into it. Don't have to worry about delegation. Select next. It's going to come up with what the NetBIOS name is based on the fully qualified name that you used earlier. So ours was delta.local, and it's going to shorten that to just delta. Okay, we're going to accept the default locations where it's installing everything. In a production server, you would normally have that on a separate drive. It's going to validate all your prerequisites. And once we get the green check on the top, that means all the prerequisites are met. We're ready to finish this. It's going to log you out and force a reboot. So successfully configures a domain controller. When you log in, you notice that the login is predicated by the domain /administrator, whereas before it was just administrator. So that means we're logging into the domain as the administrator account. So then we click on local server. When we go to server manager, we'll now see that we're a member, or we are the domain delta.local. Now we're going to go into DNS, and we're going to set up a reverse lookup zone. Reason we need a reverse lookup zone is by default, Windows DNS or domain controllers will be able to resolve a name to an IP address, but they won't be able to resolve an IP address to a name. And so what we're doing by having a reverse lookup name is we're putting our first 3 octets of our IP address in. In our case, it's 192.168.182. Yours will be different. Select next, select finish. Now we'll be able to look up stuff forward and backward. And then we can go in and look what our forwarders are, and currently it's forwarding to the VMware NAT instance, which is 182.2. And then just to verify that everything is working properly, open Internet Explorer and make sure that you can actually get to the outside world. And if you can, then you have it that your DNS is working properly and you're able to get out and validate that. Now we need to create a Windows core server. So creating a new server. This one we are not going to be cloning, we're going to be building it from scratch. So we'll install the operating system later. Again, select Windows Server 2016. We're going to give this one a name, which is going to be WCore 2016 or W2016 core, sorry. And then we need to define the location, so we're pointing that to our SSD drive, which mine is Speedy. And then we need to make a folder for it. And I called mine core, UEFI, 2 processors. We're going to take the default memory recommendation, take the rest of the defaults. We're going to do a single disk, 40 gigs. And next. And customize, we're going to remove that printer and sound card again. Going to go to our DVD drive. We're going to point it to our Windows 2016 ISO file, which you should have stored on your external SSD drive as well. Click close, finish. And then we're going to power on our virtual machine. And then make sure you click into the window and press a key in order to kick off the installer, because we're using UEFI for our install media, or our install BIOS, sorry. And next, install. Don't have a key right now. And we're going to select Server 2016 Data Center. Do not select Desktop Experience, otherwise you'll get the GUI version. We want the plain old version that is Windows Core, but we want the Data Center version of it. Accept the license, custom. Okay, once that finishes, it's going to come up and say we need to set a password for our administrator. So we'll put a password in for our administrator and confirm it. And this is, again, we can use the password 01 with a capital P. Again, don't ever use that in production. It's only something you use for a test lab. Okay, once we get to a command prompt again after it's applied that, we can run sysconfig. And sysconfig is the utility in Windows Core of how you can set all of your configuration settings. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select an option, and we're going to select option 2 to give our computer its name. And then ask what the name is. So it's Windows 2016 Core. Then hit enter. And of course, since we changed something that was major, we have to reboot. Log in with your credential for administrator. Run sysconfig again. Okay, now we need to set our remote desktop ability. So we're going to select option 7, and we're going to enable it, which is capital E. And then we're going to allow clients running remote desktop with network level authentication, which is 1. And it is now set up. Okay, next we need to set up DNS so that we can actually find our domain controller to join the domain. So on that one, we're going to go to network settings, which is going to be 8. And then the network adapt. So what we want to do is select 2, and then we're going to put the IP address of our domain controller, which in this particular case is 192.168.182.100. Yours will be different, so it's the IP address that you set up on your domain controller. And then once you have that set, you can just hit enter for the alternate, because we aren't going to be changing that. And then 4 to return to the main menu. And now we can join the domain. So we're going to go 1. And we want to join a domain, so D. And the domain to join is going to be delta.local. And the authorized user is going to be domain delta/administrator. And then the password for domain administrator, which is that password 01 with a capital P. And no, we don't need to change the computer name, so I accidentally selected yes. Don't worry about that, just select no, because we already had changed our computer name. If you do a mistake like that, you can just hit cancel. So just by hitting enter without any commands, it won't change it. And our server is now a member of the domain.